nice for a bit of a dance. I'm always up for a dance. Where are all the pens gone? I've got one on me.
Is one of yours functioning?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I can hardly speak without a diagram. But yeah, so we used to have, in our home church back in Australia, it was very, again, a nest of freaks, a little unusual, but we began to see almost the party as a sacrament, as a means of grace, how grace would come into it. So at the Y2K, remember at the millennium where everyone thought everything was going to go really bad, the millennial thing, Y2K. So we hired up a whole top of a skyscraper, had 2 bands on top of it. We had movies all in the whole. We partied in the new year, right? And it was one of the best parties in town for sure, famous. And we just would dance the glory of God down. We would dance to the glory of God. So there's something about the party, right? It brings joy, and joy is grace. It's all good. Okay, folks, so I know it's like an end of a long day. I think the process is excellent. There's not just information, but you're actually processing stuff very, very well. So that's really good. Remember where I started? I'm trying to get into this. What makes this happen? We come to this thing where we looked at the Jesus is Lord piece of the equation, the key to the equation. And by the way, I didn't design this. I thought it was really good, the way it's been done there. Disciple making. Then you've got the missional incarnational impulse. We're now going to look at the issue of organic systems. I'll do this quite quickly because that gets a little geeky, and for some people, I like that stuff. But anyway, and then the other one being, what are we missing here? Jesus. Jesus is here. We got Jesus there. That's the most important thing. Organic system. Yes, apostolic environment, and then the final one is going to be Communitas. Okay, so anyway, all of them are necessary if you want to go boom. Okay, so the answer is always bigger than what we think. We always tend to reduce things down to minimums, but we actually need to be able to think in a bigger category and then come down again. So to be a movement that changes the world, it takes 6 elements to do it. Organic systems really has to do with how movements organize themselves. And that, again, doesn't sound that sexy. But it's really important, because if you're going to go into this multiplication movement, so in China, you've got even movements that's about 3 million people. But they don't have a headquarters. They don't pay any salaries. They don't have what we ordinarily think you need to have, a movement of 3 million people. And yet they're able to maintain themselves. There's something mysterious going on. There is organization there, but it's not the way we normally think about organization. And so it's important to if we're going to go into multiplication and to scalability, as we talk in America, to scale, then you have to have a system that's able to sustain it. So a very quick summary of this, and again, I won't spend a huge amount of time on this. I'll focus it on the Communitas piece. But I argue that there are about 3 levels that we need to look at here. First and foremost, I call it the vibe of a movement, the atmosphere of a movement. And by this I mean, so that's the one, it has to have the vibe. And what I mean by this is that in movements, if this is a growth curve of start and closure, it feels more here on this side of the equation than it does on that side. That's an atmosphere thing. Movements that change the world have this kind of notion that we believe our message, we believe it is for the transformation of the world, we believe we're responsible to deliver it, so we're going to deliver it whether you like it or not, and some of them are willing to die for it. In fact, many of them are. So a lot of the Chinese, the Back to Jerusalem movement, what we call a martyrdom movement, they want to take the gospel back from China to Jerusalem. Now, you took geography. What's between them? China, Jerusalem, the Middle East. And they're willing to kind of take the gospel back on the Silk Road right the way back to Jerusalem. And they're going to die along the way. But they're willing to do it. Now, I'm not saying we have to have that. Yeah, that's quite red hot. And I don't know if that'll work in this context, but there's definitely this side. I would say what we see on this is what we call belief. I believe our message. The message is the transformation, and we're going to deliver it. There's something of that there, an atmosphere. On this side, we see it is more like doubt. If this is characterized by, yes, we can do it, we will do it, this is not so much anymore. And there's a whole lot of dynamics here that I won't look at, but I find this stuff quite fascinating because much of our ways of thinking are more based on Cartesian understandings about doubting, which is much of the way Westerners come at knowledge. I won't go terribly here, but there's certain levels of doubt that come along the way, structural, ideological, ethical, absolute. There's all stuff here. But all I'm saying is that if you're in a system that is marked primarily by this, you need to deal with it. Because unless you do, you're never going to be a movement again. We talk about this as what we call sigmoid growth. And decisions made here matter. If you're going to sell a business, sell it here. Don't try there. It's loses all its value there. That's the peak moment. All I say, there's something about
It's bonkers.
Uptake. I won't go much further than that. I can, and I rather like that stuff, and I think it's really important because how you design an organization matters hugely. If you get it wrong, and I think about this even starting a service. I mentioned yesterday to the leaders gathered here yesterday. I've come from Australia where we drive on the correct side of the road, like the British, right? And I have to now live in the United States where they got it wrong. And I had to learn to drive on the wrong side of the road. It's interesting that, how did we end up like with two systems of it? Who made that decision? And then once you make it, because everything builds in it, how hard is that to change? The warning is here is that in the front end of movements, if you've got to get the design issue right. Because if you don't think very carefully, it's very hard to change once you get going. You start a service, how hard is it to change? So just be very attentive to the issues of design, and I won't go much more on that. Second one here is that if they have a vibe of a movement, they structure like a network. They look more like Al-Qaeda in their structure than they do the papacy, with 16 levels, right, of hierarchy. Movements that change the world are very agile, and they keep moving. They have a very different type of structure. Very hard to take this out. So what actually happens, you look at Al-Qaeda, for instance, you've got, they're kind of almost a network of networks, right? That's the word we'd use of it. You've got the Al-Qaeda in the Zagreb, I think it's in Africa. You've got Al-Qaeda in Indonesia, it's called Jamaah Islamiyah. You have in the Middle East, there's a different name there. They've got the European. These are all networks. They are randomly organized, or they seem to be, in a cell. They might, in Barcelona, they might find a cell of 8 or 9 people. So they try and boom it down. So what actually happened, one gets out, they're able to take the message and start again. Simple, reproducible structure that then spreads like a virus. You can't take this out. The early church had the same structure. China has the same structure. You can't take it out. Or it's very, very difficult. So here we have all the armies in the world, aligned with kind of the coalition of the willing, and my country went in with that in order to take down Al-Qaeda. And there were only 20,000 of them when we started. How many do you think there are now? It spreads. And you look at the same thing. Persecution in the early church spreads the message. They try to take it out in Jerusalem, just spread the message. It gets more agile as it engages to the enemy, the people, it becomes more capable of reproducing itself. There's something in that we need to learn. And it's a different way of organizing than the way we do it generally. So those who are interested in organization, pay attention to that. And we need to learn a new way. There's lots of stuff here that could be very helpful, even from studies in nowadays in organizational theory and all that stuff. Again, I won't go terribly far on that. 3. they spread like a virus. And I kind of already mentioned that great ideas spread like a virus. They sneezed. And the best way I can articulate this is, have any seen the movie Pay It Forward? Okay, so anyone not seen the movie? It's worth seeing. If I flip this around, if you can see at the bottom here, the movie goes like this, and it's really some really good actors: Haley Joel Osment, Kevin Spacey, and Helen Hunt. And what the story goes like this is that Kevin Spacey is the teacher, and he's engaging in a classroom of 12-year-olds. And he comes in, and the movie starts with him writing on the whiteboard, your purpose, your project this year is to change the world, make a difference. Now, he's talking to 12-year-olds, but it's an exercise he wants them to think about. How could they, as 12-year-olds, change their world? It's a good exercise. Good to do that here. To think about how can each one here make a difference in your world. Good. So what actually happens is this encounter, and there's Helen Hunt's in there somewhere, so it's always got to be some romantic thing. The essential thing goes on like this, is that the kid picks up this idea. He encounters a hobo, a homeless person, takes him home. Mum just has a bad fit, but eventually he's allowed to stay in the basement. He reestablishes again. He wants to pay the kid back, so the kid finds the hobo. The hobo wants to pay him back. He says, don't pay me back, pay it forward to 3 other people. That's the deal. That's where the name Pay It Forward comes from. So he does this to 3 people. And he says, don't pay me back, pay it forward to 3 others. And so you get this idea going forward, right? Again, the pattern should alert us to something here, right? And you get the idea. Now, here's the story. So this is now a movement across America. Starts, I think it was somewhere on the west coast, and it begins to move away right to the east coast. And over here, a guy gets given a Jaguar motor car, kind of like a Mercedes, in a pay it forward incident. Someone says, take the keys, it's yours, pay it forward 3, The guy gets it is a journalist, a reporter. And he senses there's a good story in this, right? So what he does is he begins to track this story back to this encounter with this school teacher and the kid. Now, why I use that there? Because it's simple, stories are good and all that. But actually, because if you did the same, follow the math. Let's say if I said today, I release you from any other responsibility except this, that you are to disciple, win, evangelize 3 people into the kingdom in your entire lifetime. Nothing else is required of you but that. I think there's 200 of us. I'm not a mathematician, nor the son of one. I can't do my math at all. But I would say, someone help me out. You're probably geeky enough to do this.
No.
I would say it would take maybe 10, 15 iterations. In other words, it's 10 or 15 of these things, because it's doubling exponentially to the point of 200, x to the power of 200. In other words, folks, just follow the math. If we just covenanted today, this is all we're going to do. You would cover Denmark, in fact, you get your vengeance back on the Swedes. Don't you didn't have fighting? In other words, this is the mathematics of movement, right? Let's play it another way. If, let's say, every church represented here, maybe 30, 40 churches, maybe more, covenanted to just plant 2 in your lifetime. And you say, well, you don't have to pay us back anything, it's fine. You just acknowledge this, but put your hand on the Bible, and you're going to swear you're going to plant 2 others in the name of Jesus, right? Well, it's called the Great Commission. I don't have a problem saying this, right? Put your hand on the Bible and covenant as a community that you will plant, you will have babies, and you'll pass it forward to the next generation. 2 of them. Not going to kill you. Doesn't have to be mega church. Your little thing, doesn't matter. With the 40 churches represented here, you'd cover Denmark, I would say, in 3-4 years. It depends on how many, but not many iterations, actually. In other words, there's something there in viral growth that we need to be attentive to. Again, this is kind of, it's counterintuitive to the way we do, because we tend to go by addition. And there's a whole lot of thinking about that. By the way, a friend of mine has just written a free ebook called Spark. And I've got to tell you, his name is Todd Wilson. You can just get it on the Exponential website. But Spark is really the mathematics of viral growth. And it's very good. It's a little book. It's an ebook. 15,000 words. Easy to read. But very, very well written. Todd Wilson from Exponential. Brilliant book. And I would recommend you read it. And then, so again, I can go into Geek World on this stuff, but the other one that I would simply say, if you're going to be viral, it begs the question, if you have to be reproducible. That is, if you're going to reproduce, it has to be reproducible. And by the way, it was attributed to Picasso that he said that the best way to preserve tradition is not to wear your father's old hat, but to have children, to have babies. You tradition through your children. That is, you'll pass your heritage on through your children. It will change. It must change, because they're your children. You can't dictate the terms of their lives. That would be bad parenting. But they will take your story and carry it into the future. Invest in it. Don't try and simply preserve the past. Don't get just simply sentimental about 70s style charismatics. And get stuck in a moment and just try and keep that moment, right? Learn to grow and evolve and pass it on down the generations. That's the way, of course, viral growth happens. But reproducibility, to reproduce, implies that it's reproducible. If it takes you 8 years or 7 years, whatever it is, to train for the priesthood or the ministry, you're not going you're not going to reproduce. You can't. And it doesn't make sense anyway of the New Testament, which it seems to happen spontaneously. And it's too expensive, and it costs a lot. 2 degrees, really, to be a minister? When you were baptized, you were commissioned into ministry, you're ordained in your baptism, right? We believe in the priesthood of all believers, don't we? Do we?
Yeah.
Yes. So in other words, that's a reproducible idea. Everyone carries the code. Everyone can reproduce. Anyone has got a church in them. In a seed is a potential for a tree, and a tree is a potential for a forest. It's all contained in the smallest part in the seed. In the spark is a potential for a flame. Flame is a potential for a forest fire, but it's all contained in the spark. Again, it's just a different way of thinking about this issue of it just asks questions. If let's say you think, and this is a very American model, that if you think that to plant a church you need $1 million budget, you need 200 people before you call it a church, and you need a kind of, letterheads and a band before you can be ecclesia, well, you're not going to go very fast either. It's not reproducible, folks. Most people can't do that stuff. You've got to bring it back to the people. Where in the New Testament it belongs. It's a movement of his people. Everyone's in the game. Everyone's a possible agent. And it's reproducible. So we need to pay attention to that scalability piece. Again, of all the mDNA, of all these, it's probably the least for most people, other than people like Anders Michael, who likes this stuff, and this is for him. Because actually it's important to have people like that designing carefully. The final one actually is one that's a good way to end on it, is called Communitas. Not community, it's an odd term, and I ripped off the term from a guy called Victor Turner, who was a cultural anthropologist, person who spent a number of years living among the Ndembu people in what is now Zambia, in southern Africa. And he came to the phrase, right, so this is his story of... Victor Turner said, as he saw that all the African village, at least as where he was there, and I was born and raised in Africa, this is true for most of the southern African peoples, is that if you went into an African village, you would see 2 sides of the tribe. It's not really that, but there were 2 parts of the tribe. There is the male component and the female component. Now, we do know, even though they lived apart, there must have been something going on, right? Because the children were raised largely by the female part of the tribe. boys and girls, the boys until an age of 13, when they are then in a ritual process are called to transition from being boys into being men. And what would happen is that at a certain time of the year, when it was ritually determined, the men would, in the middle of the night, sneak into the female compound. They would round up all the 13-year-old boys. Now, this is a very emotional time because they're going to experience something now that is very dangerous. The women, if they see their sons ever again, because it might not, they will be different. They will relate very different. It's a very emotional time. They slap the boys up a little bit, disorient them, put a blindfold on them and walk them out for a couple of days into the bush. All right? So they don't even know where they are. And this is, by the way, African bush. Just to get a feel for that, it's very dangerous. Debs and myself were chased by an elephant a couple of years ago. And Debs was driving, and it was one of the gear shift cars running. She's a good driver. And I thought, oh, Debs, this thing was running at us, right? We thought, oh, get this right. And we reversed up a hill we got away from it, didn't you? But it's dangerous, right? This is 13-year-olds in the bush. And just about every animal can do you damage. So this is interesting because he calls this context, I like words, right? Liminality. Liminality, in his terminology, is this place of disorientation. They knew this world over here, but they disoriented here. They were oriented here, but this is that they have no maps of the territory. They were raised in the safety of the female compound. It is dangerous. They face, in English we call it an ordeal. And they disoriented, they marginalized is another term. Actually, when Turner came back and he studied the artists in New York City, he called them edge people. That's that freak thing, right, again. And he said artists play a similar role. He was very interested in the renewal of the tribe, what dynamics renewed the people. Anyway, so here the boys go. They go into the bush, into the liminal space. Liminal is a threshold, the dangerous place, right? And they would line them up, sharpen knives, and they'd circumcise them. Oh, that's pretty bad at 13 years old, not so cool. And then they would sit them down and say, this is what it means to be a man. They would lecture them in the traditions of being a man. And then would say, there, you see there? That's the tree of meeting. Our people have always met at the tree, at this place, in the full moon, same night, full moon, next month. See you later. The elders will come meet you. Bye-bye. And they would abandon the boys in the bush. 6 months. It's 13-year-olds, right? And so what would happen, Turner observed, is that the boys first and foremost just went, 2 by 2, 1 by 1, they just dispersed. And it wasn't long before, as they tried to struggle this through themselves, they realized they're never going to survive this thing, ever. Not going to happen. So what begins to happen is that the boys begin to find each other again. They begin to organize themselves in a band. This is the term communitas, that funny term over there. Liminality is the conditions that creates communitas. Communitas is a form of community that develops in the context of a challenge, an ordeal, a struggle, that reframes the way people understand each other and relate to each other. They move from being friends or associates to being comrades, a band of brothers who's got each other's back. They have to. Even if they don't even like each other, they have to love each other in a new way. And this is interesting because this band over here begins to organize, and they learn that together they're going to kind of discover. So they're going to kind of survive this thing. And what actually happens is they eventually make their way back, after 6 months, back into the village. This is a very big celebration. As the boys now come home as young men, they now begin to live in the male compound among the other men. And at night time, they don't have television and all that stuff, at least they didn't have then. What would happen is that they have the fireplace. And what would happen is that the whole community would gather around the fire. And they would tell stories. It's funny how fire, and you get a few rednecks around a fire, and they get all philosophical, It doesn't take long before people get quite fire, nighttime with a bit of music, whatever. It gets very philosophical. But the boys, each one is then invited to tell the story. And they can take as long as they want. It's Africa. There's no rush, easy going. And so they would tell their stories. And this is what would happen. As they would tell their stories, the young men now, what would happen is the old men would sit there, remember, Ugoni, when we went through our ritual, right? And we were chased by the leopard. Yeah, remember that. We ran up the tree. Yes. We didn't have our spears. No. That's when you lost your leg. We had to urinate on him to get him away from us. Yes, I remember that. And what would happen is it's those remember when. The remembrance, and it would awaken the memory of the people. And Turner talked about this as being, this was the cause of the renewal of the whole community. Now, interesting that alone, the dynamics of going out into a difficult or journey doesn't have to be deadly dangerous like this, but bringing back into the community renews the tribe. Now, why I say when we look at the movements that change the world, even if they persecute or not, there's a different form of liminality, and I'll give you examples of Communitas in history. But it is the form of renewal, but also I would argue that for this form, this is more normative than that. And I would argue most of our churches are this, more than that. Church is not known as a place of adventure and risk-taking. They're safe zones where we're very familiar with the territory. And we really, in America at least, it's a free association. A pat on the back on Sundays, a handshake, perhaps a hug, and then you go. There's no real connectivity. It's individuals come together to worship, but they go back. It's a very different form that you see in the New Testament or in movements that change the world. Partly they persecuted. In other words, they don't get the choice. And there was 300 years of this in various forms. Sometimes tolerated and not always. So there's something in that too. Just to say, well, all that stuff. I believe this is written through the very codes of life. Every story, every movie you've ever seen goes like this, right? A movie goes like that, and this is our mythic codes, right? Pick a movie in the top of your head now, your favorite movie. You don't have to say it, but you got it, everyone? This is what you will see happening. Normal life, people just getting on with each other and all that stuff. Something happens to create conditions where a person is now disoriented. So we have orientation, know what I'm doing. Now you disorientate and undergo an ordeal and you return back but you come back different. Right? So every movie, I would argue every story contains something of that adventure ritual. It's called a hero's myth in Campbell's idea, where he comes back with the elixir of life, right? The hero's journey, right? This is deeply structured in storytelling. Adventure. We yearn for it. We watch Hollywood. We prefer to outsource it to the movies and imagination than to really experience it ourselves. But the very fact that we would see these movies, how many movies are there like where you've got like CIA agent, all things cool, all of a sudden something's gone wrong, right? All of a sudden he's got a piece of information going to take the government down. Now he's on the run. You got the feeling he's not going to quite make it until the beautiful woman comes into the equation, right? And she, is drawn in by her compassion. It's not even about sex at this point because there's not enough time, right? And they're just on the run all the time. And together they actually achieve what they couldn't have done separately. And then they return as the heroes and change the day. How many movies are like that? Because actually Hollywood understands the yearning of the human heart for adventure. And they tell us our stories so that we can hear ourselves in it. Remember the storytelling parts of it over here. Communitas could take a place, okay, we're in a business together, I'm staying up as the CEO, listen, we're going bankrupt, we're in big trouble, and there's a big account we're going to go for. We're all going to have to work double hard. Everyone is double hours. We're going to get this account because if not, half of us are going to lose our jobs. And what actually happens is that everyone puts double time in. You might get a little irritated with each other. That's all right. Only 5 minutes, okay, that's cool. And then, but nonetheless, together we're going to get it done. And get it done in the end. And now we break out the champagne, and now there's something fundamentally has changed in the way we relate to each other. Just a deadline can create that condition. Let's say, for instance, over here, what's your national sport? Is it soccer? Football? You can't play football with this many people, but play with me. If let's say we divide it around down the middle of here. This is the red side. This is the blue side. Go, right? And so what will happen after 2 hours of playing? Let's say the Blues lose because they got the Blues, right? So you're the Blues, right? The Reds are going, yeah, the mighty Reds. We are the, so you might be singing songs, you might invent a couple of songs. You might not even know each other, the person sitting next to you that you're playing with. But there's something happens in the bonding, even in the losing side. There's something that bonds you together. With the Blues, we'll do better next time and all that stuff, There's something happens. I would argue actually that most team sports, people are doing it not for the physical exercise, but they want communitas. They're looking for that sense of connection with some other people. And again, the tsunami united the whole world. You can pick examples of this all. Disasters can unite people in a way that sometimes times of kind of cool, easygoing things don't. So there's something in that that we definitely need to learn. So much for that, all that sociology and all that stuff. Let me do some of the scriptural stuff for you. You can play with me, interact with me on this as we close this out. Old Testament. I'll pick the first one. See where you see this pattern in the Old Testament. I'm going to pick Abraham. Abi, hit the road, right? Take your family. It's not just a nuclear family, 2 kids and the dog and cat. This is like the whole shtick, it's like a big deal, right? And so he says, go to the land I will show you. I don't know where it is, but go. And so he's got to take, they say about 70 people. Why do we know that? Because he goes to war 3 times. You don't do that with a nuclear family. And he's taken, because of course extended families included your grandparents and even your servants and, everyone's cousins and all that. So it's a big family, not the nuclear family. And he just takes the step out into the unknown. He becomes the father of the faithful. He defines faith for us even today because of his brave act. And he's rewarded as a person who is his faith accessed righteousness. That's the kind of faith that opens up God's power. It's not just intellectual ideas, it's this trusting faith in God, that you would trust your life. It's a gamble on the promises of God, right? Pick some more, Old Testament, big ones. Joseph's story, excellent. And talk about the extreme liminality in that. But all the Jacob, all those narratives are there too. Other big ones. David and the warrior band. Now, there's something distinct about that I think invites. I would like to ride out into the sunset, with David and the band, right, doing crazy deeds. Don't get too much detail; they were a bit crazy. but there was something about that brotherhood, in a sense, if I may use that word. I think women have this worked out better than men, but men yearn for this in ways that I think is missing in the churches. It's. I said, so let me just say it again. Women are better at just about everything, and that's scientifically proven, and theologically right. And but actually, I think so much of the way we do church lacks that adventuresome side, that I think men yearn for. It's like we're just going to come sing songs to God and listen to each other. It just doesn't resonate. Anyway. But, okay, so then you got the Exodus is a huge one. A group of slaves escape from the superpower and through the Red Sea. And God covenants with them on the other side in Sinai. They're in the desert place. The desert is the classic liminal space in the Bible. Classic. And they are covenanted there. They're going to the promised land. And he says, beware lest you get into the land the Lord your God gave you, the community, and forget what the Lord of God did you over here. So the Jews are called to remember the Passover. And we're called to remember this. If we were there, we affirm the covenants. It's a way of reliving the story. Another one, Babylon. So you got like Israel, who after so many years and centuries, in fact, had not given faithfulness to the Lord. They are cast out of the land into Babylon. And they learn in Babylon what they could never have done in Jerusalem. And they come back a faithful people. Israel never did idolatry afterwards, you know. Never. It's purged out of Judaism. It's a horror to that stuff in Judaism. Even today, it's got an allergic reaction to Judaism, to idolatry. Jesus and the band, the 12, you know, they don't know what they're doing. He takes them out there, sends them out 2 by 2, sometimes, you know, into the unknown space, as lambs amidst wolves. And they come back saying, you know, we saw demons being cast out. And they experienced something fundamentally that has shifted. And then, of course, you've got the book of Acts. It's like a rollicking adventure story, ultimately ending up at Patmos, the most extreme liminal place in a prison, on a prison island. And in that extreme place, God reveals himself to the Apostle John, in which we've got our revelations. It's written through our codes. I would argue, folks, that our richest, densest downloads of information are in the place of liminality, not in the safety places. But we actually learn to experience and know God when we're actually learning to live on a bit of adventure, put adventure back in the risk, not being so risk averse that we can't take a risk, and cultivate like this kind of this safety consciousness. Let's put the adventure back into the venture. Thank you.